This presentation is a fundraiser for the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center. For donations, please go to the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center website, press on donation, and select Herb Kagan from the drop-down menu. Your generosity is welcome and appreciated.
Oh, wonderful. Good. Thank you, Rainey, so much. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. Thanks to Zoom, we have an international contingency here. The demographics are just awesome from all over the world and from every fellowship and even from no fellowship at all. People who are just interested in a spiritual awakening. My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm here to talk about step 3. And I would invite you to join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I've got you up now, primarily, I'm assuming, on the screen, a series of slides that will assist me in helping navigate our journey today. I'm going to be talking about step 3. Obviously, in the following months, I will do some work in the steps, but not necessarily corresponding to each of the months, because, for instance, step 4 is a huge inventory description and process, and so I've split that into 2. In April, we'll talk about resentments, and in May, we'll talk about fear and dishonesty and secrets and dysfunctional, unhealthy sexual behaviors. And secrets, did I say that? And then we'll pick it up from there. My journey really began in terms of recovery when the hospital asked me a question. It's a methodology now I've adapted, and since the big book has the same methodology, and I'll make a point of it when we get to it in the step 3 discussion, of asking questions right at the beginning, asking questions and then giving some information, and then having you take some action. I took some action. They asked me the question, what is your relationship with alcohol? I wasn't there to have a discussion about my life, my problems, or my drinking. They were not a problem to me in my consciousness. I was there to support my wife's recovery. She was in the hospital and inpatient for her alcohol problem. I was there to support her. And they started asking me questions. Go figure. They knew what they were doing, but and they knew that I didn't know. But they couldn't. They also knew that they couldn't confront me directly. That they needed to invite me into the process, into some consciousness. So they asked me this question to ask myself: what is your inventory of your relationship with alcohol, going back to the beginning? What did you drink? How did you drink? What happened, etc., and do a bullet point inventory up to the present moment. This was 1984. At the conclusion of that writing, they had me read it out. The writing was important, and I began to connect the dots. But the reading it out loud to a group of inpatient men, that was the hammer that dropped, the key that was put in the lock that opened the door for me. For the very first time, I saw and experienced that I had a drinking problem. I was not embarrassed that I had a drinking problem. I was not surprised that I had a drinking problem. I was embarrassed and surprised that I had never seen it. I didn't know that I had a problem, but I also didn't know anything about alcoholism or 12-step or recovery. And they said, take some action. I had an experience. And it was like, okay, so what do I do now? And you see the questions percolated, and they developed more action as long as I got some information. Now, I suffered a long time in AA. I came into AA in 1984, February, and I got a sponsor right away, and he said, get a book, and I did, and he said, read it, and I did, and he said, work the steps, and he didn't tell me how, and so, you know, I'm reasonably intelligent, fairly well educated. I read English. I said, okay, I'm in AA. Look at the drama in my life. I must be an alcoholic. See, I didn't know, and he didn't know that he didn't know. It's not a play on words. It's an observation of reality. And unfortunately, it's a pandemic reality. Lack of information is a lot of our problem. That's why I do this work. I suffer because of lack of information. Now, I'm not dismissing or denigrating or downgrading at all addiction. Addiction's a problem. No, there's no question. Unfortunately, it's not it's not the problem. Because if it was the problem, you just stop drinking and then the problem's over with. And actually, many people, including me, once you start drinking, your problems really begin. Because your problem isn't drinking, your problem isn't the addiction. And I'm welcoming everybody here on the call, on the Zoom presence. If you're not an alcoholic, please use words that describe your problem, whatever that is in terms of an addiction or whatever the source of your suffering is. I'm asking you now to ask yourself that question. What is your source of suffering? You have to hear the question, though. I'm a wordsmith, and I use words extremely carefully. I hope with the precision of a neurosurgeon. The big book does that. Bill is a wordsmith, and he uses words precisely. Pay attention to the words. They're not poetry. They're not philosophy. They're not theology. They're not psychology. They're coming from his experience, and he's very careful. That book was written with group conscience. It was wordsmithed by at least 10 to 50 people back in the day. Cleveland, New York, Ohio, Akron. Bill would write it. Then he would send it out to all of those folks, and they would make their notes, and he would get it back, and he would consolidate it. The book was written by group conscience, mostly by Bill, that's absolutely right, but modified a lot in the best ways, especially in this area of steps 2 and 3. So the question that I asked you was, what is your primary source of suffering? I didn't ask you what your primary suffering is. That might be just the smoke. I'm asking about the fire. Your current suffering, as you're aware of it, might just be the blood from the wound. What's the nature of the wound? What's the source? Where does it come from, this suffering that you're experiencing today? If it's an active addiction, that's pretty straightforward. And if in fact you're in abstinence right now and you're still suffering, that's not so straightforward. I'll review just a little bit, the best kept secret in the rooms. The source of suffering. Bill Wilson said in the big book, many spots, alcohol's not the problem. It's a symbol of the problem. Alcohol's not the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. I believe it's page 64 and page 102. I'm not sure about that. But in many other places, he also says, the problem is a spiritual malady. The problem is a cancer of the soul. That may not be words, cancer of the soul from the big book. It comes from the Oxford group, the predecessor group to Alcoholics Anonymous. They were not about alcohol. They were about conversion, transformation. They were about Christianity. Fundamentalists in the best of senses. I'm a big book fundamentalist and literalist in the best of senses. I read the book. I try to understand the words as they were written in 1939. What's your current primary source of suffering? Einstein said the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. So you're coming at this workshop today with a current level of consciousness. Now, many of you have experienced an improvement in your consciousness, and you're aware of that improvement in your consciousness. And some of you are not, and that's just what is. You have come today with whatever you have, and you can see whatever you can see, and you can know whatever you know. But to the extent that you come here with an attachment to what you see and what you know and what you've experienced, to the extent that you come attached to it, you're prevented from having any new knowledge or any new experience. And Einstein, in that quote, says, you cannot fix your mind with your mind. If your mind is in fact flawed, then anything it produces will have the flaw in it. Brilliant. I was introduced to this at 10 years of sobriety, this attitude of set aside. I had lots of experience and exposure. I had a sponsor I called every day. I went to a meeting every day for those 10 years, absolutely. I worked the steps in 1988, 4 years sober, with a step guide, not my sponsor. I did that in my first year with very little effect, but I didn't know that until I did it in 1988, 4 years sober, with a man who understood the big book and gave me instructions precisely out of the big book, which I followed. And I had a spiritual awakening for the very first time, but no experience with steps 2 and 3. I did the work again 3 years later with another man, a mechanic with the big book, a mechanic with the steps. I had a powerful experience. I could describe it, but I won't, because that's not the subject of today. But no experience. No, not even touched with any new knowledge or any new experience with steps 2 and 3. But the third time I went through the work with a man who again was another mechanic. Most of them gave about 80% of the same instructions, but that 20% difference between them made all the difference in the world. And this time, this man introduced me to this set-aside attitude. He quoted Einstein. He gave me a prayer that he called the set-aside prayer. It's not in the big book. It's not an official prayer. It's a made-up prayer, and it's changed. Those of you who have been with me for a while know that I've actually changed it. Originally, I said, God, please help me set aside. And after about 5 years of praying the prayer and having a consistent practice of meditation, I was very aware that I was praying to God so that I could stay in control, because I was asking for the power to set it aside. God, please help me. Oh, really, Herb? Again? And I saw the truth for the very first time. And so I changed it to the way it is right now. God, I want direct intervention. Keep me out of the equation. If I get my hands on it, it's going to get corrupted with my ego. And I won't know it and I won't see it. It'll just get corrupted if I touch it. Direct intervention is what I'm looking for. Enter my heart and open it. Enter my mind and open it. Enter my soul with your crowbar and open it. I'm consenting, I'm inviting, I'm willing. To the extent that you hold on to your current knowledge and your current experience, you're prevented from having any new knowledge or any new experience. My constant, even today, experience is that I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I don't see. And I need a new pair of glasses, and I need the glasses that I have refracted on a regular basis so that I can see reality as it is, not as I am. That's a psychological term. It's fairly sophisticated. It's a great insight. All of us see reality as we are. We project out onto reality our knowledge and our experience, and we filter reality through our knowledge and experience. And we don't know that, most of us. All of us at regular cyclical times do that unconsciously. And the whole point of the 12-step process is awakening. One of the Russian philosophers, Gurdjieff, in the 19th century said, all human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake. Oh my God, I love stuff like that. Succinct wisdom sayings that just pierce the shield and get through to the soul. All human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake. This is so relevant to a 12-step process whose promise is the 12th step, having had an awakening. Bill calls it spiritual, and I could spend some time explaining that. I won't. It's not the subject of today. Awakening. That's the whole point of the 12-step process, to become conscious and then to have power. Listen to the 11th step. At the end, praying for knowledge, consciousness, and the power to carry it out. Most of us learn to know better. And if we're really successful, we learn to do better. But knowing better doesn't mean that we do better. There's the problem of unmanageability. There's the problem of the spiritual malady. There's the problem that needs a solution. Lack of power is my problem. Lack of willpower is my problem. Please join me. And you can say it out loud, or you can say it quietly, or you don't have to say any prayer at all, or you can use your own prayer. It doesn't make any difference. At least have the attitude, adopt the attitude, at least for the next hour or so, that I'm really willing to have an open mind and an open heart, and I'm willing to have it as a gift. I can't create it, but I'm inviting it. Please join me. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. And so Bill talks about the bondage of addiction, but he also talks about the bondage of self. This was a cartoon that I saw in the New Yorker magazine way before I got sober, but once I got sober and started doing workshops, trying to give some images so people could hear the words in a different way, I came up with that. And there's a second cartoon that I'll bring up in a little bit, but this captures it, where some of us are in the prison of our addiction. Now, it might be a substance addiction, it might be a process addiction. Those are professional terms: substance, alcohol, drugs, and food. Process, everything else: relationships, sex, pornography, gambling, shopping, debting. So many different ways that we can be hijacked by our brain and our body in terms of reducing tensions in our life. That's the whole point of it. Bill uses in the 10th step the word disturbed as the catch-all phrase. It's a spiritual axiom. He says in the 12 and 12 in step 10. It's a spiritual axiom. Whenever we're disturbed, there's something wrong with us. When I first heard that, I had not had any experience with the steps. And it's like, well, no, really, you haven't met my wife. That's my problem. No, really, you haven't met my dad. That's my problem. Oh, no. You haven't met the 4 bosses I've had all my life. And those are my problems. I did not know, as I said in my opening comments, that I had a problem with addiction. And then for the first 4 years, I thought the problem was the drama. 502, that's drunk driving arrest in California, blackouts, embarrassing moments, jails, hospitals. A story for a different day. I thought the drama made me an alcoholic until I did this work. And I saw that, no, the substance alcohol was my problem. When I put it in me, I lose control. And I can't stop putting it in me, even when I have stopped for a while. I have a problem with my body. I have a problem with my mind. And that's the substance problem for me. And addiction is repetitive behavior over which I have no control that leads to negative consequences. I'm not degreed, I'm not certified, I'm not qualified in any professional sense to give you official designations and definitions and even an interpretation of the big book. I'm coming at you with knowledge and with experience over these last several decades, actually. 1 out of 10 people are addicts from alcohol or drugs. In the last 10, 15 years, I've been exposed to an awful lot of addiction in the food area. There's about 5 or 8 different 12-step fellowships to treat that. I think it's the most difficult addiction that there might be. And then there's the process addiction. Of course, Al-Anon started in 1951, an addiction to the addict. People go to Al-Anon not because of the addict. They go to Al-Anon because they're addicted to the addict. And I'm oversimplifying it. I'm not in Al-Anon, but I've heard a lot of experience addressed that way. But the real problem, Bill says, is unmanageability. All human beings, Gurdjieff, are asleep dreaming that they're awake. Bill says, basically, all human beings have unmanageability. We have a problem with our willpower. Lack of power is our dilemma, he says on page 45. Not alcohol, not addiction, not substance or process addiction. Oh, they are definitely a problem. I'm not minimizing that, and that needs to be addressed. But Bill's very careful on page 64 in terms of the order and the priorities of things. It's a little out of context, but listen to it in the resentment inventory on page 64. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, the 2 parts of the first half of the first step, a body and a mind problem. We have been spiritually sick. That's his synonym for unmanageability, the second half of the first step. Listen. When the spiritual malady is overcome, unmanageability, we straighten out mentally and physically. The big book has such internal integrity. In step 10, he says, we're placed in a position of neutrality with regard to our addiction. Yes, by the end of the 9th step, when we enter the world of the spirit in the 10th step, pages 84, 85, read it. It's very dense. You have to unpack it. You have to meditate on it. You have to discuss it with people who have knowledge and experience of it. But it says we're placed in a position of neutrality. Hear the grace of that? We are placed in a position of neutrality. But we finished the 9th step. Hear the work and the effort and the willingness that went into that. I call that co-creation. A collaboration with the Spirit, my willingness and God's grace. I'm using God in the very generic term that Bill does. We reviewed that in step 2. God as I understand it, Bill says. Herb says, God as I don't understand it. As Groucho Marx said, I'm dating myself. He was a comedian in the 50s and the 60s. And he was referring to club membership. Any club that would have me as a member, I don't want to be a member of. He was a comedian. I'm being very real here as a theologian. I'm not a theologian, but coming from that perspective, any God that I can understand is too small. Because I'm finite. And whatever that reality is, by definition, it's infinite. That's the work we do in step 2, making a decision about God. Because we had in step 1 an experience that we need power other than ourselves. Some of us choose to call it God. God is not God. God is the symbol of the reality that we hope exists. The 12-step program is based on that. You've seen it in the big book, the 3 components of the 12 steps. Trust God. Those are the first 3 steps, right? I don't have power and I need power. I make a decision about power in step 2, and I make a decision to have a relationship with power in step 3. That's what we're going to talk about today. I like context. I don't like to dump right into it. I give us a context so that we have some skeleton to put the flesh on. Of course, then clean house. Steps 4 through 7 is removing the obstacles to power. In step 2 and 3, we determined the power is deep inside ourselves. But there are obstacles. Bill calls the power in us the sunlight of the Spirit. I love that metaphor. The sunlight of the Spirit deep down inside of us. Read page 55. Bill answers the questions that he asked on page 45 using that methodology I described earlier. On page 45, where and how are we going to find that power? On page 55, he says, deep down inside, search fearlessly, search diligently, think honestly. With this attitude, you cannot fail. It's all there on page 55. Deep down inside. In fact, it's such an important concept. He gives us 2 different paragraphs that say the same thing. Unusual for Bill to be redundant, to repeat himself, but this is such an important concept. This is such an important truth. Deep down inside me is the sunlight of the Spirit. But what's the problem? Oh, obstacles to the sunlight. The clouds in me, that's that signs of suffering, the symptoms of suffering that I referred to in my opening comments. The clouds in me are blocking me from the sunlight of the Spirit, are blocking the sunlight of the Spirit from me. Those clouds in me that I've created. You don't know that until you've done the 4th step. And after you've done the 4th step, at least out of the big book, at least in my experience, and you've done your 5th step, you're very clear. I'm 100% responsible for my life, 100% responsible for my thoughts and my feelings, and especially my actions. That's a story that we'll unpack next 2 months in the 4th step. 4 through 7 is the 2nd stage. 8 through 10, I believe, is the 3rd stage, or 8 through 9, depending on your way you want to parse it. Because that's about our obstacles in our relationships with other people. 8 and 9 rehabilitate our relationships with people. But then, in fact, the final phase, the orbit around the light, the way of life that Bill describes to us, he says we enter the world of the Spirit in step 10. We enter the world of Spirit. We have to ask, well, where the hell have we been? If at the end of the 9th step, beginning the 10th step, we're entering the world of the Spirit, where have we been? Oh, we've been in the world of self, steps 1 through 9. So now I'm entering the world of the spirit. I'm saying it, please, because step 3 is so clear. At least once I've understood it and looking through the rearview mirror and had an experience with it, it's about turning. Made a decision to turn. Step 3 is not surrender, please. I heard it and I repeated it for 20 years in the rooms. Yeah, sounds cool. Surrender. Very spiritual. Surrender, white flag. I throw the flag in and I take it out a piece at a time. I hear that all the time. I understand the metaphor. It's just wrong. I mean, it's just wrong. Listen to step 3. Made a decision to turn. Wow. Make a decision with my free will to turn. That's not surrender. Surrender is a great word for step 1. First of all, you know that surrender, well, you may not know. I didn't for a long time. Surrender, the word, is not in the big book. Yep. From the doctor's opinion, page 1 through 164, the word surrender is not there. It's a great word, and it's applicable to step 1. I'm completely defeated. I give up. I surrender. Boy, that couldn't be more apt for step 1. Unfortunately, when you use it in step 3, surrender, it has a passive connotation to it. It's not, but it has a passive connotation. Oh, I give my life and my will to God. That's not what the step says. Read it carefully. Bill scripted step 3 perfectly. Made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God, not to God. More about that in a minute. So steps 10, 11, and 12, he calls our way of living. He says we're not cured of our unmanageability. We are recovered from our addiction. I'm not playing with words here. This is not semantics. I'm being very careful and insightful, I hope, for you. Pages 84 and 85. We have recovered. Read the title page of the big book. How thousands of men and women have recovered, past tense. Well, what does that mean? I don't know. Bill doesn't tell us, but I assume from reading and understanding and interpreting the big book that it means that I don't have a problem of the mind and the body at this point because I'm living in grace. I'll use that term. I'm living in the protection behind the shield of the light. And as long as I live behind the shield of the light, the darkness doesn't descend. I'm invulnerable to the darkness. He says we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. The best kept secret in the rooms. Unmanageability, what does it mean? Spiritual malady. A problem of the will. Addiction is a problem of the body. When I start, I cannot stop. It's a problem of the mind. When I stop, I cannot stay stopped because of the obsession. Unmanageability is a problem of the will. My capability of making a decision is impaired. On my own power, I do not have free will with regard to my addiction. I do not have free will with regard to managing my own life. These are the assumptions in the big book and my interpretation of the meaning of those words in the big book. But I do have free will. Civilization's built on that basis. The decisions I make, the actions I take, I'm fully responsible for. That's civilization. And there's rewards and there's punishment for the actions that I take as an individual. I'm responsible for it, and 100%. So what is my power? What is my willpower? And we saw that in step 2. If you were with me on page 53, Bill says it, wow, so insightfully and incisively. God is, page 53, God is or God isn't, what is your choice? Step 2 is a decision about God, about higher power, about the reality or the entity that is represented by the words and the thoughts that we have. And the silver bullet of the 12-step fellowship and process is for us to choose our own word. What word captures for us what we need this reality, this entity to be? What word captures the attributes and qualities that we need it to be? This is our way of life. Bill calls that 20 times in the big book, steps 10, 11, and 12. That's the program of living. Steps 1 through 9, as I interpret it, steps 1 through 9 are the program of recovery. But we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Well, is God necessary? You've seen this, I'm sure, image from the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo spent years on his back painting the Sistine Chapel. The hand on the right is the hand of the Creator, symbolically, reaching down to earth. God made humans out of God's image and likeness. He made them male and female. God touched the dirt. Adam is dirt. It's not the name of the first person. In Arabic, Adam, A-D-A-M, means earth or dirt. God reached down and breathed into the dirt. God made humans. God made them in God's image and likeness. God made them male and female. A meditation and a commentary for another day. Is God necessary is a critical question. In step 2, we answered it with the power other than ourself is necessary, and I get to choose that. All right, I get to choose what it is. And I do that because I'm experiencing bondage of certainly my addiction. I've tried psychology, I've tried religion. I tried so many things personally. I studied to be a Catholic priest for 7 years in a monastery. 7 years of silence. Wouldn't you think I would come out a restored and healed person? Or why would I come out? I didn't find what I was looking for. Again, many stories for a different day. But there's the other slide. A peek at the freedom that we really do have as the result of doing this work. Now, I'm not saying exclusively that this is the only way to find freedom. There's wonderful freedom found in therapy, wonderful freedom found in organized, authentic religion. There's wonderful freedom found in love and relationships, wonderful freedom found lots of. I was not able to find freedom until I did these steps. And I did them over a few years, as I mentioned many times with several different people. That's why I love the way step 2 is worded, came to believe. A process like a dimmer switch. The light goes up a notch at a time. And it got brighter, and it gets brighter, and it stays getting brighter, as I mentioned in some of my informal comments in the beginning. Is God necessary? Well, what is your concept? Just a little recap here. Right now, what do you actually believe about God? Write down a word or a phrase so that you're participating with us here in this conversation about step 3. Yes, we're getting there. But step 3 is based on step 2. What is your concept? And is it real? The question that opened me up at 10 years of sobriety I was able to answer that question really well. I wrote a little paragraph on theology. What is my belief about God? And then he asked me a second question a week later, and he asked me to write on that question. And how do you behave in light of what you believe you believe? And I saw my agnosticism for the very first time. And he took me through step 2, making a decision about power. I saw was a faith decision. Empty, insubstantial, dark, invisible, a decision. Oh my God, there's no thought, there's no certitude, there's no feeling attached to it. It's just an empty decision. God is. Bill says that's all you need is that willingness. Page 47. And that's the cornerstone to the arch through which we'll walk to a new freedom. I'm going to talk about that arch at the end of our comments today, so that you have a perspective on where we're going with this thing after step 3. Walking through an arch to freedom, he says willingness is the cornerstone. I'm assuming then that the step 1 is the foundation to this arch, a strong foundation with a cornerstone that sets the direction for the entire arch. Faith is that decision. God is. It's a decision that I have to come up with. My concept. What is my concept? All right, finally, at step 3. That's right from the big book. Made a decision to turn. I've mentioned that. From what to what? You have to ask. Look at the words literally. We're making a decision to turn. Oh. From our self-centeredness that Bill elaborated in page 52 and 62. Read those if you haven't been familiar with them. The second paragraph on page 52, the bedevilments, and the first and second paragraph on page 62, the bedevilments being the behavioral description of unmanageability. Page 62, those first paragraphs describing the exact nature of where that comes from, those bedevilments, that behavior, selfishness, self-centeredness. That is the root of the problem, page 62. And at the bottom of page 62, he puts the wooden stake in the heart, if you have any doubt. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We're as powerless over our will as we are over our addiction. He had the same conclusion on page 43 to the bottom of the to the conclusion on the mind and the body. We have no effective mental defense against the first drink. That's where he ended his commentary on step 1. Intentionally, formally, structurally in the big book, but the way it was pieced together for me, I was able to see that he actually meant to includes unmanageability, of course, as part of step 1, and he describes it in chapters 4 and 5 in different pieces. And this man was able to sew that cloth together so that I was able to have a solution of the puzzle piece. What does unmanageability means behaviorally? Page 52, those bedevilments. What does unmanageability mean in its exact nature? Bill gets right down to the nubs, right down to the bare rock essentials. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that's the problem with the will. My will always choose me. I'm the center of my world. Yes, that's healthy. I'm the center of the world. Yes, not so much. That's not healthy. But everybody thinks that way until they don't. And that's the rite of passage of the big book and the rite of passage of children to adulthood in normal society, if that even exists. Made a decision to turn. a relationship with power. Now, the word isn't used in the big book to describe step 3, relationship. But I'll show you where Bill actually assumes that it is a relationship. My relationship is a trust relationship, meaning that I act as if I believe what I said in step 2. God is, all right. Do I act that way? Do I pray? Do I meditate? God is power. Do I rely on that power on a conscious 24/7 basis? This is the keystone, he says, in step 3. So in step 2, he talked about a cornerstone. In step 3, he talks about a keystone in the structure. Let's take a look at page 58 for a minute. He spends on page 58 quite a bit of time talking about rigorous honesty. Lots of people have a difficult time with what does it mean? They're constitutionally incapable. I take it literally at face value, by their very constitution. And Bill spends 3 sentences talking about that. It's such an important distinction. Constitutionally, by our very nature, by our very structure, by our very biology and psychology, some of us, not most of us, some of us are not able to distinguish reality in any sense of honesty. They are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They have been born that way. Hello. Born that way. They are naturally incapable by their very nature. Most of us are not this way. We're talking about psychotics. We're talking about sociopaths. We're talking about psychopaths. Not capable of relating to reality. Not capable. Not because they're ill-willed, not because they're ill-informed, not because they're ignorant, not because they're willful. No. Most of us are that. Bill's talking about biologically, physiologically impaired, whether that's born that way or from a trauma or accident that way. Demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. He never is black and white, hardly ever. Then he transitions. There are grave emotional and mental disorders. Emotional and mental. He's making a beautiful, insightful distinction there. But they do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. When you're constitutionally incapable, you don't have the capacity. I challenged myself on that because I inherently was very dishonest, but that was just a habit, a defense mechanism, a dishonest defense mechanism so that I would get what I thought I wanted. Of course, it doesn't work long term. It works short term. Like alcohol works short term. It doesn't work long term. Addiction works short term. That's why we use it. It reduces tension, but eventually it creates more tension, of course, like that boomerang Bill talks about that cuts us to ribbons. That's why we're here, most of us. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, you're asked all the time, what does it mean to go to any length? And you hear some stuff, and some of it's good and some of it's fluff and stuff and not so healthy. Any length. Stand in a corner on your head spitting nickels. Yeah, I mean, you hear stuff from the old timers that they're just trying to make a point. That's all. It's well intentioned. Sometimes it's not very helpful. The big book answers the question, what does it mean to go to any length? Then you are ready to take certain steps. You see, this is the prelude to step 3. And the step 3 is the prelude to steps 4 through 9. There's no action in step 1. There's no action in step 2. Step 1 is an experience. Step 2 is a decision. There's a very little action in step 3. It's a decision and a commitment to prayer And the prayer is an action. And the prayer action and recommendation is with somebody. Curious that Bill would say that. He doesn't explain why. My interpretation is we come to step 3 and go through step 3 and are committed to the balance of the steps, but the act of prayer in public with another person is the witness to our commitment. That's not the way the big book reads. He doesn't use the word witness, I don't believe. Oh, in the prayer itself he does, actually, yes. But that's my approach. Every one of you has already done step 3 effectively by coming on this call because you knew the call was about step 3, and your very willingness to come to this call was your expressed willingness in step 3 and your expressed turning. You've already taken the step by just showing up. But now we're eventually toward the end of our time together, we'll pray the 3rd step prayer out loud together in an unusual way, at least by my standards. A practice that we did in the monastery called Antiphonal Prayer. I'll describe that in a little bit. At some of these we balked. How kind. Balked, hesitated, didn't follow through. How kind Bill is. My experience is at all of these we balked. I've balked every time. Stopped doing the work, delayed in my consistency, of course. We tried to find an easier, softer way. We beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Listen to this now, invitation to the set-aside attitude, right here on page 58. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Oh my, can I let go absolutely? Not my experience, absolutely not. Normally the big book is very balanced. In step 3, Bill doesn't use the word absolute because that was a word that came from the Oxford group. They had 4 absolutes. But he navigates the big book, including the principles of the absolutes and the vision of the ideal of the absolutes. And here in step 3, I'll just read a summary of some of the highest of standards and absolutes and ideals that he has as value propositions in step 3. Completely give ourselves, really completely? Decided to go to any length, really? What does that mean? Half measures availed us nothing. Well, first of all, I understand the principle. My experience is it's not necessarily true in everybody's respect. We do the best we can, and sometimes we even don't do the best we can, and yet there are results. I'm responsible for the effort, and the results are none of my business. Although if I'm not getting the results that I want, I better take a look at my efforts. These are really encouragements to have a step guide or a mentor or a teacher, or we call them sponsors. And again, the word sponsor is not in the big book, written in 1939. And if you read the 12 and 12 years later, 1951, the 12 and 12 is replete with the word sponsorship. So someplace in there, the word came into the culture of the fellowship, sponsorship. And if you want to take a look at perhaps a profile of sponsorship that Bill intended, look at page 18. There's a couple paragraphs there that give a really nice profile. Doesn't call it sponsorship, but that's the only word that's missing from it. We stood at the turning point. We think well before doing this without reservation. We abandon ourselves utterly. Really? The last time I saw utterly in the big book on page 45 was with regard to step 1. Our human resources as marshaled by the will were not sufficient. They failed utterly. We need to abandon ourselves utterly. Again, that value proposition, that model, that high ideal. We do the best we can knowing that it's not the best we can, and we do it anyway. That's the key to success here. And that's why Bill says on page 47, willingness. He said it's the cornerstone. Willingness. It's totally, that one word is the center post of my recovery. I was willing to go to the hospital to support her recovery. I was willing to take a look at my own drinking history and to do it in writing and then to read it verbally to a group. I was willing to even entertain the idea that I might have a drinking problem. That was as close as it got. And after several meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous, I rolled over and said, I'm an alcoholic, but not because I knew what that meant. I thought it meant that drama that I talked about. I only learned about what an alcoholic is from a progressive exposure to step 1. 1988, a problem with the body. 1991, a problem with the mind. 1994, a problem with the will. Came to experience powerlessness and understand what that meant. Came to believe in a power other than myself and to really experience what that meant. Came to is my experience. Entirely ready. Really? Ask protection and care with complete abandon. Really? These are the words in the big book. I'm not going to go over it word by word, line by line, as I do in my workshops, but I'm giving you a feel of it. On page 59, he says, there is one who has all power. That one is God. Step 2 is the assumption of step 3. So it's really important that you get really clear on what decision that you made about power. May you find God now. This process, steps 1 through 9, is about finding power. It's not about alcohol, please. It's not about addiction, please. Addiction and alcohol are the precipitating, presenting problems. But the real problem is lack of power and unmanageability. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. Notice page 59 is warming us up to step 3. We stood at the turning point. On page 14, I go kind of fast, just make notes. Don't try to follow me in the book. Unless you want to, it's fine. Page 14, simple but not easy. This is Bill's story. Simple but not easy. Everything I've described is not sophisticated. It's not complicated. It's not rocket science, literally. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant the destruction of self-centeredness. That's that unmanageability that I talked about. I must turn. There it is. I must turn. In all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. I must turn from the darkness to the light. I must turn from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness. And I already know that I can't do that on my own power. I cannot do that. We asked God's protection and care with complete abandon. It's kind of like the GPS. I love that analogy. I'm sure I heard it in a meeting someplace. It's my car. I own the car. I have the keys. I have a driver's license. I have insurance, and I know how to drive. I know where I want to go. I don't know how to get there. So when I get in my car, I put into the GPS, whether that's in the car or in my phone or whatever the mechanism I have for a GPS, most of us have one. I put the address in. And then I listen and I follow direction. Oh my God, is that perfect? I put the GPS, I put the address in the GPS. Then I take responsibility for driving the car. I'm not turning my life and my will over to the GPS. I'm turning my life and my will over to the care of the GPS. And I'm going to listen to the directions. Go south on the 405, get off at Crenshaw. Oh, you missed the off-ramp. Get off at the next off-ramp, make a U-turn. I mean, you follow directions and you get where you want to go. I love it, especially for us. If you have a connection with a person who you have trust and they have knowledge and experience, that's the point of sponsorship or a step guide. What an order. I can't go through with it. No one among us can maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. I do workshops, and about 40% of the people are perfectionists, admitted perfectionists. There may be more. All right? It's not healthy, but it is who we are. And that's why I really make an effort, and that's why the big book says, just do the best you can, knowing that it's not the best you can, and do it anyway. The success is not in knowing. The success is in doing. And then correcting mistakes when you make them, being humble enough to receive direction about mistakes and actions that you can take to correct. And that's a habit that grows over time. Willing to grow along spiritual lines, spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. And Bill captures it then here on page 60, doesn't he? Those three statements are the transition into step 3. Step 1. I'm an alcoholic or an addict. First half of first step. Please parse it the way I'm looking at it. The ABCs on page 60. That we are an addict. First half of step 1. We could not manage our own lives. Second half of step 1. That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. The transition from step 1 to step 2. I need a power other than myself. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to make a decision that it is. And see that God could and would if we were sought. Notice the words. It's not a redundancy. It's not a stutter. Could, meaning it has the power. Would, meaning it has the care. Steps 2 and 3. Turning our will and our life over to the care of God. I heard a wonderful confrontive statement. I won't unpack it today, but it's worth your time to unpack it. God protects us from nothing and supports us in everything. Boy, that causes a fury in my workshops when they first hear it. God protects us from nothing and supports us in everything. That is the reality, the healthy reality that we're talking about in terms of the reality behind the symbol God. Being convinced of steps 1 and 2, our powerlessness and our need for power, and that there is a power that cares. This is all preparatory to step 3. We turned our will and our life over to. Well, then he asked these questions again, like I talked about in the introduction to our time together today. Well, what do we mean by that, and what do we do? Please, these are not throwaway questions. These are a setup. The next couple pages are going to answer the question, what do we mean? The next couple pages after that are going to answer the question, what do we do? Well, what do we mean here? The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self will hardly be a success. Well, if you've done the work of unmanageability, you've done the work looking at your behavior connected to those bedevilments, and you're pretty convinced, not from an intellectual understanding, but from an actual experience of, man, I'm screwed. I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. That was the complaint of St. Paul in the Christian scripture. I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. He called it a thorn. This is self-will run riot, Bill says. We're always in collision with somebody else. We want to be the director, not the actor. Page 61 and 62 is an absolute wonderful description of our manipulative effort at leading our lives. What usually happens, the show doesn't come off very well, so I'll try harder. I'll get up earlier, I'll run faster, I'll go to more workshops, I'll read more books, and I'll stay up late, and I'll wear myself out. Many of you are like that. On page 62, as I mentioned, he nails it. Selfishness, self-centeredness, exclamation point. There's not even a verb. This is the silver bullet. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. Until you do a fourth step, you really won't hear the technicolor implications of this. We invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self-unmanageability, the spiritual malady, self-centeredness, selfishness, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So our troubles are basically of our own making. We're extreme examples of self-will run riot. Addicts are extreme examples of self-will run riot. By contrast, human beings are self-will run riot. Addicts are just on steroids, the steroids of our addictions. And I believe that's why Bill had that prophetic sentence in the first paragraph of the very first preface to the very first book, April 1939. He said, our way of living may have its advantages for all. What a prophetic insight. This 12-step process is a human process of transformation. And it's open to everyone who wants a transformation, a spiritual awakening, a change in the way we think and feel and behave. It's done to us, not by us, but it's not done without us. That's why I like the co-creation concept, the collaboration concept, the words of grace and willingness, God's grace and my willingness. I had trouble with that, trying to figure out which comes first, willingness or grace, grace or willingness, which comes first, the chicken or the egg or the, well, the egg produces the chicken, but the chicken produces the egg. Yeah, I struggled with it for a little bit, and I take it into meditation, and I reflect on it for several days, maybe weeks even. That's just the style, my style. And I was given a poem, but it didn't answer the question, which comes first, but it gave me satisfaction for some reason. And I just was able to accept that. Hear this. I was taken to a place of willingness. Hear the grace. I was taken to a place of willingness. But I was willing to be taken. Hear my willingness. Very much in line with the set-aside attitude. I've already quoted on page 62, the wooden stake in the heart, as Bill ends his description of unmanageability here. What do we mean that we have to turn our will and our life over to the care of God? Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. This is the how and the why of it. Now he's going to tell us what to do. We had to quit playing God. Why? He gives us the answer, the very next sentence. Because it doesn't work. Oh yeah, that's why I'm here. My life is not working. Oh, I got free of my addiction in 1984. I didn't do anything for that. It was a gift. It's just my story. I didn't go to AA for another 3 months. And even when I went to AA and I got a sponsor and I worked the steps, I didn't have a spiritual awakening. I didn't change my behavior. I wasn't drinking, that was a gift, but I was still operating in terms of contrary to most of the human and spiritual principles that are in existence. Some I was aware of, some I wasn't aware of, but I flaunted them because I was self-will run riot, but I didn't know that I didn't know. I continued the behavior 4 years sober that I was doing before I ever got sober. But in 1988, I had this experience in doing these steps and having an awareness that if I continued that behavior, I would surely drink. He says that on page 70, page 70. If I continue that behavior, I will surely drink again. That is out of our experience, Bill says. And this man said, you either have to stop the behavior or you're going to drink again. And fortunately, I finished the balance of the work and the behavior stopped. And I continued staying pressed up against it, and the inclination to the behavior went away after a couple of years. Here, I just made a huge distinction between the behavior and the inclination for the behavior. That's step 6 and 7. Bill calls it, by my terms, the Rite of Passage. He uses the terms in the 12 and 12 that the boy becomes a man. In our terminology, would say the child becomes the adult. The Rite of Passage into adulthood, taking full responsibility for my life, for my behavior, and also for my accountability. That's what I consider to be the 2 parts of steps 6 and 7. I am powerless, so I pray, but I'm human, so I hold myself accountable. We quit playing God. Next, we decided that we have to have a relationship. The word's not there, but he tells us to choose a director, to choose a principal, to choose a father. And the relationships, of course, are actor, agent, and child. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone. This is the stone that holds the entire arch together, this arch through which we're going to walk to a new freedom. A new and triumphant arch through which we walk to freedom, he said. I've created an image that helps me. You can look at the PowerPoint and you can look at me at the same time. There is a life force flow. This is the decision of step 2. There is a life. What brings an acorn to a sapling to an oak tree? That life force. That's what we're talking about in terms of a power other than ourselves. This life force in the universe is very observable. An egg becomes a chicken. Well, how does that happen? An embryo becomes a baby. Oh my God, this is the miracle of life. There is a life force. The acorn cracks open, becomes a sapling, becomes an oak tree. But I have free will. And I can go against human and universal principles. I can be dishonest. I can be hurtful to other people. I can have total self-centeredness in the pathetic and pathological way, all right? And I will suffer and people around me will suffer. And the turning, please watch, the turning that I think Bill is talking about is the turning to be in alignment with. Remember the GPS? The GPS is the GPS, that's the power. But I put myself in alignment with the flow of the power. The turning that step 3 is a commitment to is the steps of 4 through 9, which are the turning. I apply the steps. I do the steps. I work the steps, whatever the words are that you want to use, and I am turned into alignment with. Now, the word's not in the big book, alignment. But I just love it. And it came to me only, maybe 5 or 10 years ago when I was trying to help somebody who didn't believe in all of the vocabulary from spiritual talk, all of the vocabulary from 12-step talk. And he's 24 years old and he's sitting in front of me. And this is his 8th inpatient treatment center. 24 years old, 8th treatment center, inpatient. And he doesn't want to hear about spirituality, and he doesn't want to hear about 12-step. None of the vocabulary that I've used and have, I go quickly into quiet prayer. I want to help this young man. How can I do that? And this image came to me, and I talked about, Kevin, do you believe in a life force, the acorn, etc., that I talked about? And he said, oh yeah, I believe there's a life force in the universe and energy. You know, I knew I had it by that point, but he didn't know he was had. And I said, and do you have free will? He said, oh yeah, I can leave this place anytime I want. I came here on my own. I definitely have free will. And so your free will is going against the life force, and you can turn to be in relationship with the life force. Well, he didn't react to it, but I met with him the next week, and I could tell by his demeanor, I could tell by his vocabulary that something had happened. And I said, Kevin, what happened? He said, I got tired of suffering. I said, oh, okay, good. Then what happened? I was willing to take direction. And I said, then what happened? He said, I quit resisting. I have told the story 100 times. I don't know whatever happened to him, but he got it. He had a moment of grace. A decision for a relationship. A decision to be in alignment. Here's the question that I'm asking you to ask yourself. What relationship do you want? What relationship do you yearn for? On page 63, Bill has a couple more relationships that we talked about. I gave you 3 from page 62. Here it is in the first paragraph. He talks about the employer. Obvious relationship as an employee. In the next paragraph, he talks about maker. I don't like the word, it's a bit awkward. I like the word creator. For me, it works better. It's not in the book, but it works better. It's a synonym for maker. The maker relationship is the product made, of course. And the the relationship of creator is that which is created. I have the image of God as the sculpture, the potter, that sits by the potter wheel that turns with a lump of clay on it, the lump of clay being me. And every morning I sit in the presence of the potter as a lump of clay, setting aside my knowledge, my experience, my expectations. And I invite the potter to have the way with me, to create me to be the instrument today, to be a channel of grace. Whether that be a water pitcher or a pipe or some form of utility for this day. And it's a wonderful image that really primes the pump for my morning meditation. What relationship do you yearn for? What a rich word. From your heart, from your soul, what relationship do you yearn for? Think about that. Pray about that. Write something down, a word or a phrase. It gives us the promises of step 3 there. I'll read them in a minute as a meditation. And then he goes to the second paragraph, which talks about the prayer. One of the benefits of doing this work with this man at my 10 years of sobriety is that he asked me to write my own prayer. Not to improve the prayer in the book, but to understand it. When you have to take the words in the book and plagiarize them, make them your own, you have to obviously understand what they're saying, what the principles are. Write out your own 3rd step prayer sometime. I think it will give you a deeper insight to the prayer in the book. I've never used any of the prayers I've ever written about the third step. I really love the third step prayer as it's written. I update it with the thys and the thous sometimes. We were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker, as we understood God, the italicized words, the big book's way of highlighting really important concepts. At the end of the prayer, which is where the quotes end, on page 63, that second paragraph, at the end of that second paragraph, it says, we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly. As I mentioned, the last time we saw utterly was in step 1 on page 45. Utterly powerless. We found it desirable to take the spiritual step with an understanding person. As I mentioned, he uses the term spiritual advisor here. The wording, of course, is quite optional. That's where that suggestion came to write your own prayer. So long as it expressed the idea of voicing it without reservation. This is only a beginning. Step 3 is only a beginning. Maybe that's why it doesn't have an amen. Think about that. All prayers that I'm aware of have an amen at the end. Why doesn't step 3 in the big book have an amen? Well, because it's not the end of a prayer. It's the opening of a beginning of a process. Step 3 is my commitment and witness in public to my doing steps 4 through 7, and step 7 begins by Creator. Brilliant. I've come through step 4 and 5 to see my corruption. I've come to step 6 to name my corruption and its powerlessness, and I come to step 7 knowing that I'm so broken and I need to be recreated, and therefore the words out of my mouth are my Creator. Brilliant. I need to be recreated. You're the original architect. I need to be fixed because I'm broken. And that prayer ends with an amen. The second stage of the program of recovery. The first stage being a relationship with power, steps 1 through 3. The second stage being a relationship with myself, with my true self, as I've seen it now in steps 4, 5, 6. My true self, broken but willing to be healed. One of my teachers, he's not in a 12-step program, he's a Trappist monk, died about 3 years ago, Father Thomas Keating. He uses the term core of goodness. So when I use the term broken, I'm not talking about something that's essential to us. He uses the term core of goodness. And the Hebrew scripture, Genesis in the Torah, talks about image and likeness. Spark of the divine you've heard from some of your readings, I'm sure. Spark of the divine. Voicing it without reservation. Well, of course we have reservation. What does it mean? I'll end up on the streets of Shanghai with a saffron robe and a begging bowl? Well, that's just an old idea. No, literally, that was my idea at one point. This is only a beginning, though if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a very great one, was felt at once. Many people have a sense of relief with the third step. Many people have a sense of elation with the third step. Most people just do the third step and then get on with it. Our certitude and knowledge is not important. Our emotions and our feelings are not important. If they happen, they happen. If they don't, they don't. What is important is how our feet move. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's really important to have a sponsor or a step guide to take you through the steps. There's lots of wonderful moving parts to the program of recovery. Meetings, of course. At some point, we'll get back to physical meetings. Right now, Zoom meetings. The big book is the textbook. From my viewpoint, it's the most important book I've ever read because it's an effective methodology for human change. The most effective methodology for human change that I've ever read. The big book is my number one book in terms of importance, impact on my life. I couldn't read it on my own. I needed help to be able to discern the step process in there. There's a precise methodology in this textbook, but I couldn't figure it out on my own. I'm reasonably intelligent, fairly well educated. I have a graduate education in philosophy, theology, and psychology, all three disciplines. And I couldn't read the big book and figure it out on my own. I needed help. First, of course, prayer, because I'm powerless. One of the key ingredients to the program is service, helping other people, turning from our self-centeredness to other-centeredness. But the key for me, a word that's not in the big book, but a word that is absolutely essential in our culture, is sponsorship. Or as I use the term step guide for a person who takes me through the steps. I need an accountability partner. I had and have always had a sponsor. I've had two, one for 28 years. He moved out of town. I believe in local sponsorship. And now I have a local sponsor. And we meet periodically as a sounding board. I call him periodically as a sounding board. But I've had to always go outside my sponsor relationship. It's unfortunate, but it's just what is. It's not ideal for a step guide, as I've mentioned. I've engaged a project manager 4 different times, 4 different men, 4 different experiences. It's just my experience. I'm not recommending it. I'm merely confirming it.
I just have a clarifying question about the last slide. It said service contrary action.
Yes.
If you could please explain what that means.
Yeah. One of the crusty old timers talked in my early recovery about actions contrary to your inclination, contrary to what you want to do, contrary to what you think is the right thing to do. So it's taking actions that you don't believe in, taking actions that you don't feel good about, but taking them anyway, because somebody with experience said, go to a meeting early for 10 minutes. Don't you know how busy I am? Yes, go to a meeting 10 minutes early. And what happened is it retrained me to be thinking about other people rather than myself. Does that help?
Excellent. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, you have to be careful about taking directions from people in a 12-step meeting, because my perception of a 12-step meeting is the outpatient ward of a mental hospital. Yes, that was supposed to be funny. but not all people are informed or experienced, but everybody has opinions.
That is correct. Thank you.
I'm trying to play nice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Last month we did step 2, and I asked you the question around searching fearlessly, seeking diligently and honest. And I said to you I had an issue with my honesty around my sponsor, and you said to me your insides have to match your outsides. And what I realized is that I didn't understand what honesty was. And I had to look up the dictionary. There's actually no clear definition. And I realized from my childhood, I developed honesty to always tell the truth. Honesty is the best policy. But when I did that, it was backlashed. So I changed it. So what I realized is, with my sponsor, I was always kind of testing to see how, I'll give her this bit, but I won't give her that bit. And I got honest. I told her my insights. I haven't fully finished, but I told her there's more, but I'll write it down and give it back to her. But what I wanted to say was really thank you, because I have been abstinent ever since. And
Wow.
that is really, really profound, because I struggled so much.
Wow.
And now I know it's okay to be honest.
Yeah.
And when Kevin, the boy you worked with, it said, I got tired of suffering, I was willing to take direction, I quit resisting. My resistance was around
Yeah.
that honesty because of the fear of it.
Right.
And as a result, I mean, I can't explain it, but things have happened that I can't even imagine. And
No, that's right. Yeah.
my relationship, I now have a relationship with my higher power.
Yeah.
However, my self-will still runs riot, and
Yeah.
I am trying to, you asked what relationship do you yearn for, and I just want a united one.
Yeah. Yes.
And thank you for the step 3 turning, the actual demonstration, because that makes it so much clearer.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share that because it's just been profound, and I really, really appreciated it, and I really didn't know. So I get what that means. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Yeah, and so so just thanks very much. That's all I really wanted to
And
share.
at the same time, and you pressed another button in me, which is not too difficult to do. I've got lots of buttons, but and that is trust is never given. It's earned, and it's earned by consistent behavior. So as you're feeding out little bits of more transparency, more honesty, and you get sort of a positive or at least a digestible reaction, then you learn to be more trusting.
Mm.
You know what I mean? That's progressive too. Came to
Right.
believe, came to trust.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, because that's a witness to the power of hearing, experiencing, experimenting, and having some success with it.
Mm.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So I had done my step 3 and come to a really comfortable place with what my higher power is, who my higher power is, and was enjoying some wonderful synchronicities. I asked for a teacher and a teacher came and so forth. And then I was doing my action plan, and one of the things that we were talking about in Overeaters Anonymous is that you need to come to a better relationship with your body and your body image. And I was like, oh, I don't like anything about my body. So I'm going to start with, I don't know, my fingertips. So I started writing this little poem, they can tickle and tap and da-da-da, and was really enjoying it and having a great time with it. And finished whatever, went upstairs and sliced the tip of my finger off while I was cutting food. And that basically has put me out of any kind of relationship with my higher power.
You're blaming God for your accident.
Yep.
Oh, all right. Well, I mean, you can do that if you want. I mean, does it sound to you when I say it, does it sound as silly as when you say it?
Because I then worked through my resentment with your step number 4s.
Yeah.
And I did come there. But, and it does sound a little bit silly because actually, but there's a history of when I'm happy,
Yeah.
something horrible happened.
Step 2 is a decision about this reality. What does it mean to make a decision about this reality for you? What does it mean? Does it mean your life's going to be wonderful? Or does it mean it's going to be consistent? Does it mean you're going to get what you want or need, or that you're going to feel good? And what does it mean, a decision about God?
Yeah, I think it means that if I have a relationship with God or a higher power, who is the goodness and the brightness, then good and bright things will happen, or
Yeah.
I'll have the strength to.
I mean, it's kind of a Disney concept. You're believing in fairy godmothers and stardust and Santa Claus. And it's not correlated at all with, quite frankly, with my sense of what a decision means. God is power. God is caring. And that's why I love that phrase that challenged me at first. God protects us from nothing and supports us in everything. And if I make a mistake, I'll slice my finger off. Or if I'm on the freeway, unfortunately, there's a drunk driving coming at me, I'm going to get hurt. It has nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with free will and human beings. If I'm at the base of a volcano, I'm going to get burned when it erupts. It has nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with geology.
So then I guess my question is, how do you know? Like, so if you're in a relationship, there's somebody there, but God is emptiness in some aspects.
Well,
that's
for me, that's the healthiest question. How do I know? Number one, I don't, because faith is a decision. It's not certitude or knowledge, and it's not feeling. But my own spiritual director said, you will know in your rearview mirror. After you've meditated for 90 days in a row consistently, all right, take a look at your behavior. Have you changed? Ask your wife how you're treating her. Have you changed? I will know by, in fact, my relationship with reality. My wife died 3 years ago after 52 years of marriage. All right. And the last 35 were just wonderful, good friendship because we're both in a program. People are born and people live and people die. There are accidents in between and there are joys in between. And that's just life as it manifests. God protects us from nothing and supports us in everything. And there's a meditation. What does it mean I make a decision that God is? It doesn't mean that my life is going to be a walk in the tulips. It means that I will have the grace and the power to be able to navigate life with some dignity. At least that's my interpretation. All right.
okay. Thank you. I'll contemplate that.
Yeah, it's a process. Wonderful, and you're so conscious. It's great, but make sure that you're plugged into reality, because God doesn't change reality, and reality is material, and material is corruptible, and people have free will, and Stalin killed 20 million people. It's not God's fault. All right, thanks. But these are the questions that philosophers and theologians have struggled with historically. And we've got some approaches and some answers that may be satisfactory. Nothing completely satisfactory. Thank you so much.
Every human being is asleep, dreaming that they're awake. And of course, God protects us from nothing, but supports us in everything. Yeah, those two were pretty profound for me and hard. And if you could, just elaborate a little more on them both.
Thank you. No, it's wonderful that you heard it. The second one I've talked a little bit about, and quite frankly, it would take a longer dialogue to, I think, do an adequate job of discussing protect us from nothing, supports us in everything. And I'm just going to leave it for you to think about and discuss maybe with your colleagues there, because it would be a great subject for a discussion. In terms of asleep, dreaming that we're awake, the big book assumes that. Step 12 says a spiritual awakening. Oh, that might mean, he doesn't say this way, but it might mean that we're spiritually asleep. I know I was both psychologically, emotionally asleep, as well as spiritually asleep. I walked out of a monastery after 7 years of silence, hung up my black robe and didn't meditate for another 25 years. What's that? Well, because I was asleep. I didn't know that I didn't know. I didn't know what meditation was. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know the value of it. And so after 7 years of silence and daily practice, I left without, because it was all from the outside. And it took the process of the 12 steps to begin to wake up. It took the question in the hospital, what is my relationship with alcohol, to actually I'm 43 years old and I've got all that education and self-reflection and exposure, and I'd never seen that, in fact, going to jail twice and in a hospital once and regular blackouts and embarrassing moments was a problem with alcohol. I was asleep to that. All right. And then as I described my progression in the 12-step process and in the meetings and using step guides and sponsors over a 10-year period, you could see that I was progressively waking up. What I use as a metaphor for the spiritual awakening and spiritual experience, read Appendix 2 in the back of the book, by the way, for the comparison of how they're the same and how they're different. I use the metaphor of a dimmer switch. A light switch you probably have in the room, and you turn it on and the lights are bright, and you turn it off and the lights are down. There's darkness. But a dimmer switch is when you press it, there's a little bit of light because there's enough electricity, but not very much coming into the channel. And as you turn the dimmer switch up, more electricity, more energy, more power comes into the cable, and the lights get progressively better. This work for me mostly is about spiritual awakening, mostly about the dimmer switch, mostly about the light getting brighter over time. And the really good news is that we're in pursuit of infinite light. So the dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time, but there's no end to it. That's totally my experience now after 37 years. On a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, I'm aware that there's more light than there was yesterday or last week or last month. And so that's what I mean by awakening, this progressive consciousness that I'm aware, and I'm becoming more aware that yesterday I wasn't so aware. Does that help?
So my question is, after hearing about just the lovely, trusting friendship, as well as, spousal relationship that you had with your wife.
Yeah.
And my question is around any advice. I have a partner who is not in a 12-step program.
Yeah.
I mean, background is that he could not be more supportive of me. Whatever I need to do,
That's great.
So that's just not an issue. And I have a very strong 12-step community, so I'm not alone in this at all.
Yeah.
But sometimes it just feels like such a disconnect that he just doesn't understand.
Yeah. Well, first, he doesn't have to understand, number one. All right. He really doesn't have to understand, because what you want with him is transparent communication, and you want a loving, affectionate, kind relationship. I'm assuming that's maybe what you have, actually. What changed the relationship with Mary and I is when we decided in the morning to have a cup of coffee together. We both enjoy coffee, and we weren't taking much time because she's busy with stuff and I'm busy with stuff. And it's like, and we meet, poop, poop, poop. All right. So we said, okay, let's take 15 minutes in the morning and have a cup of coffee, because we both have our coffee anyway. And there are two rules in the communication. We won't talk about our respective difficulties, all right, in the sense of we're not going to inventory each other's program, number one, and we're not going to talk about kids or money. Everything else is the open agenda. We can share what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what our aspirations are, what our disappointments are. All right, that grew from 15 minutes to an hour because we enjoyed it so much. And it was an incredible development of a friendship on both parts. So it's spending time.
Yeah.
The same. I would give the same advice in terms of meditation. If you want to have a friendship with God, spend some time.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Herb. I have two questions. The first is, you mentioned, it's a clarifying question. You mentioned when you were talking about we'll go to any lengths.
Yeah.
And then you said how, some people, have these sayings that aren't that helpful. And then you said there was like an answer about that, but I missed it. What are the any lengths? I feel like I need to go to them.
No, it's a great question. It's on page 58. Take a look at about 2/3 down on the page, and it says, willing to go to any length, dash, we take certain steps.
Okay.
Which really, when you put it in the context of where it is in the big book, it's right at the beginning of the introduction to step 3. So it's saying, okay, you take step 3, and then willing to go to any length is finishing steps 4 through 9.
Okay.
So the question is, and this is rhetorical for you and everybody on the line, have you finished steps 4 through 9? Seriously, have you finished, each one of you, have you finished your 9th step? Have you made all your amends? You can make amends to dead people. You can make amends to people that you can't find. You can make amends to people that you shouldn't find. You can complete your amends. It might take creativity. It might take a spiritual solution, but you can finish your amends.
Okay.
That's what it means.
And I'm also just in the beginning. So even though it's rhetorical answer, no, I haven't. I'm starting this with you. So but that is helpful to know that that's what the answer is. So thank you. And my second question is, I really held on to it the first time I heard you say it last month when we were talking about step 2, but that it was at the very end in response to somebody who had a lot of pain. And you said, God protects us from nothing and supports us in everything. And I think this will very much help me if I can believe it. But my question about it is 2 parts. In the step 3 prayer, it says, take away my difficulties.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how that's different than protects me from nothing. And then also in the part where, because I have food addiction and I feel like a lot of it is not like this thing that I'm obsessing about. It's like the mental blank spot.
Yeah.
And so I have prayed in the morning and at night to protect me from the mental blank spots. But like, if he's not going to protect me from those, I don't know what to do.
Well, and I hear your question, and it's a complicated answer, but I'll try to make it as straightforward as possible. Number one, the big book suggests that we will have a spiritual shield, my terms, at the end of the 9th step. It says on page 83, 84, at the end of the 9th step, that we are placed in a position of neutrality. My image of that is like the Star Wars ship. A spiritual shield, it protects us, makes us invulnerable to the obsessions that you're talking about, but not a moment before you finish your 9th step.
Okay.
And then in terms of the terms, take away my difficulties, it's not so that I have an easy life. Listen to the words. That victory over them will bear witness to those I'm trying to help, because it's never going to be about me in the big book. Well, of course, bottom line, underneath, it's always about me, because it's my decision. It's my decision to turn. It's my decision to take action. But in the prayer, it's so that I can be a lantern for other people to see, oh, Herb was a jerk. Herb did the steps. Herb's no longer such a jerk. Yeah? Yeah. Everything we want is on the other side of 9. Freedom from the addiction and freedom on a daily basis from unmanageability. Will there be speed bumps? Yes, but we will have shock absorbers to handle the speed bumps.
Okay. And I also just wanted to say that after, because in my program, when you're going through a way of life or a way of living, the AWOLs, you have to go back to step 1 when you break.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a misinterpretation of
that. So I told my sponsor and she said she'll take me through the steps even if I'm breaking. So thank you for telling me that.
Bam, that's a really, really helpful sponsor. Mm-hmm. She will work with you and take you as you are, as long as you're willing to take direction.
Yeah, thank you.
No, that really Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
So you don't necessarily have to be abstinent to go through the steps. Did I hear that right?
If you're powerless over your addiction, how can you go through the steps to get power?
And I've been trying to figure that out myself.
Yeah, so you need to go through the steps to get power. Don't put the cart before the horse. Now, is it better to not be drinking to do the steps? Absolutely. Yeah. But I will work with somebody who hasn't had a drink that day.
Okay. Yeah, because mine is food, and I really I can go maybe 4 or 5 days.
Yep.
And then it's like something goes into my head.
I start again. You're not promised neutrality till page 83, 84. I've had the question so many times, especially from the food addiction people. I can only attempt to interpret the big book. And the big book says we're placed in a position of neutrality on page 83, 84, which obviously is when you finish the 9th step.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to hear you say this, because I've been trying to figure out how in the world I can get through I can get abstinent and then go through the book. I haven't been able to figure that out. So this makes sense to me.
That's correct. And there's a group in OA called A Vision for You.
Yes.
And they're very committed to the big book and the step process in a fundamental, literal way. So I would recommend you and anybody else to.
Well, and I do go to A Vision for You. Right. And there is a person there that is a well-known speaker that profoundly says, if they take a bite after they've gone through the step 1, and you go on, and then they go back to the food, take them back to step 1.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that's his experience. It's not mine, and it's never.
And I have never understood that.
Somebody relapses in the 4th step. We have a conversation about it. We acknowledge it. We check out behavior. What's going on? Are you robbing banks or what? But if in fact, they're in pretty solid shape, we just move. Continue on. Don't drink in between doing the steps and doing the meetings and etc. But come back and. Yeah,
it makes more sense to me now.
Lean gently into it. Yeah, good.
Thank you. Thank you.
I started to learn what was going on and started to learn how to love that person more rather than fight and stand my ground. And that's what Al-Anon taught me. So, but my sponsor, at the time, the veteran AA guy, his resentment started to ooze from his pores. And I say that in all fairness to him. And he says, well, I can't be your sponsor anymore. And I said, you know what? I think you're right.
What was his reason for not being your sponsor?
Because I wanted to go to Al-Anon.
You needed to get a new sponsor.
Yeah. So I haven't had a new sponsor since then. And again, the mentorship. What I would
suggest you do is you pray the set-aside prayer about what you think you know and want and feel and expect about a sponsor, and do that for anywhere from 30 to 90 days daily. Meanwhile, in prayer and meditation, make a list of what you're expecting in a sponsor, what you would love to have in a sponsor. You're not writing a job description, but you're kind of making conscious in yourself what are the things that you feel would be very helpful to you. If you want to pursue it even further, there's a book out of Hazleton called 12-Step Sponsorship by Hamilton B. I've read it 3 times. My sponsorship workshop is based on my experience as well as reinforced by his book. And you could actually, my sponsorship workshop is like a 3-hour workshop. I believe it's on YouTube. And so you could take a look at that. But you got some work to do, but stay open because there's no rush. You sound really on track. You sound very healthy. You sound very common sense. And just be gentle, but do some work as you move forward, and trust the process.
What's the name of the book again?
12-step sponsorship.
Okay, thank you so much. And I do listen to some of the Hazelton stuff, which has also been awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Herb.
One of the things this Hamilton B says in the book, that he's got lots of wonderful suggestions that are very practical, but one of the things he says, that the person is really enjoying their sobriety.
Indeed.
and their life. Yeah.
You mean the sponsor? You mean the sponsor?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. That's one of the ingredients.
Indeed.
For me, I don't have any rules. I'm not kidding when I use the image. I'm a lantern that shines the light on the path. That's my job. I'm not the light. I'm not the truth. I'm just a channel. All right. And then people can walk the path in the light of my experience to have their own experience. I don't have any rules. Like AA, Bill said, only two disciplines. One is alcohol and one is God. You're either going for the light or you're going for the darkness.
And so they have these examples about, so I asked my higher power what I should wear. And so I think that's what kind of throws me off into thinking it's, what's your take on that?
I think it's primitive. It's a primitive interpretation. It's worshiping relics and idols and voodoo. All right. God doesn't find parking spaces. Give me a break. All right. So it's not, first of all, it's about guidance. The Oxford group where Bill and Bob were trained in meditation, the whole purpose of it was guidance for the day. Now, it might be that you ask for an intuition as to what I should wear today for this particular event. I have no problem with that. But I believe it's more for the guidance of my behavior, the guidance of my thoughts, the guidance of my feelings. How can I be helpful to other people? How can I be a decent human being?
One of the things that you touched on today that really struck a chord in me, and one of the things I stress when I'm taking anyone through the work, especially if it's a brand newcomer who is like me, does not believe, doesn't even want to believe, and getting to this place and choosing the relationship. In the book, it gives the example of father, son, agent, principal. I forget the other one, but I had bad relationships in those areas. With my father, I did not want that relationship. I was a jockey for a lot of years, and I had an agent that I was always in conflict with. I didn't like that relationship. And my employee, I've never had an employer that I ever got along with. So those just didn't stick with me. I couldn't use those in terms of seeking my own relationship. So when I went back, and you suggested that I go back and look at my concept, and the only concept I could come up with at the time was creator. That was the only one I didn't have any conflict with. I could understand if something created life. I didn't want to call it God, but something created life, and I knew that. And based on that, my relationship was so vague. He was the creator, I'm his creation. And I thought that was so vague, I was afraid to read it to you when I first wrote it out. And you told me how huge that was. And I thought you were so full of shit, at the time. But here 27 years later, I can tell you that relationship has grown to mean everything to me. It hasn't really changed all that much. It's not as personal as some people need to have relationships be. But in terms of my life, God is everything, and everything that comes to me in my life, people, circumstances, experiences, are all God's will for me. And how I show up for these and how I react to them and how I deal with them is my will, oftentimes in conflict. But it's those what I call necessary humiliations of hitting the wall again one more time and realize I've hit a dead end one more time, and coming back to my senses. And I look back in the rearview mirror, as you say, I can see that was so necessary. That was absolutely necessary. That's exactly what needed to happen to bring me to a place of peace and serenity in my life. And it has. Yeah. And I'm so grateful for all of that. But I can tell you at the time when I was going through it, it seemed so not so much confusing. It just seemed so vague, and it seemed so mechanical. And I just, because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I couldn't see what I couldn't see. And as you said, I couldn't see that I didn't know. And so, I had to go through the rest of the steps and work the steps and come to some form of awakening, at least, to where I could begin to see outside of myself instead of as myself, seeing reality as this giant creation that gave me life. And I'm grateful for all of that. Thanks.
And the point that you're really making without saying this is that life has speed bumps. And this work gives us shock absorbers to handle the speed bumps. And there's a huge difference between pain and suffering. All right. Life is filled with pain because we're material beings and it's corruptible and it begins to disintegrate the moment that we're in it. I mean, the moment we're born, we begin to die. I mean, literally, and eventually we all do. All right. So the difference, though, between pain and suffering is my attitude. Viktor Frankl, a Viennese psychiatrist in Auschwitz, wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he said, I can't control anything. I can't control the nature. I can't control the weather. I can't control the food. I can't control the guards or the inmates. I'm in Auschwitz, for God's sakes. I can't, what do I have in terms of my human dignity? He says, I have the ability to create my attitude about it all. There's where we are. There's the decision that we're talking about in step 3. The decision, not knowledge, not feeling, it's a decision. Steps 2 and 3, if we can really get that, it's just a decision. What is your choice? Bill says on 53. And on 63, he asks us to implement that choice in a prayer and a commitment to the balance of the work. So
how do I know what's like God's directing me? Because I feel better. I'm feeling better because I'm feeling better, I feel like, I've got more wisdom. Right. So how do I know that that's God that's guiding me and not my wisdom, so to speak? Or
your ego, or your dysfunction. How do I know that I'm dealing in objective reality and not my subjective dysfunction and spiritual malady? How do I know that? Yeah, that's why sponsorship is so critical. A sounding board of some kind. It could be a good friend, it could be a therapist, it could be an attorney, it could be a soulmate, it could be sponsor or somebody as a sounding board is crucial for us. Prayer, of course, but we can still be self-delusional in prayer, in meditation. And that's why I need an objective wisdom person as a sounding board. And I've had them at different, and we call them different things. Today, the most relevant person for me is a spiritual director. This is not a person in 12-step recovery, but this is a person who is totally deeply rooted in the spiritual journey and who I trust intuitively. And so I use people, and I used to use Mary, my wife, as a sounding board because she really had my back. She was my best friend. She really had my interest at heart. There was and I was very clear, there was no manipulation there. So I could trust her with my soul, all right? I don't have that anymore, but I have 2 daughters, one 30 years sober in AA, one 30 years recovered in Al-Anon, and they're wisdom women. They've done this work out of the book, and so they've agreed to be companions on this path, not just as father and daughter, but as companions on this spiritual path.
Thank you so much. It's very helpful, Herb. That really answered my question.
Yeah. Well, and the question's really healthy, and the answer's really important. Thank you so much, Nadia. So prayer is, of course, quite simple. It's in the book. You don't need to know it. You don't need to read it. You don't need to have memorized it. I'm going to lead you through it in a very different way, at least unless you've been exposed to this work with me before. And the meditation I'd like to propose is the promises. Each step has promises. Oh, we all hear about the 9-step promises on pages 83 and 84. Very prominent, very wonderful promises, great. Very few people talk about the promises of each step. All right. This is the promise of the 3rd step, page 63. When we sincerely took such a position. Oh, so let's pause for a moment. I asked you to ask yourself, what relationship do you yearn for? This is the position that Bill is talking about in the big book, this relationship. The big book talked about those 5 relationships. I asked you to ask yourself, well, what relationship do you want? I've had a architect choose the divine architect. I had a doctor choose the divine healer. I had a woman who had a whole history of failed relationships choose the divine lover. I had a wonderful personal choice by a man who had been coached in a very wonderful way as a teenager by a beautiful man who coached him into baseball. And now he's a coach and he's sharing his experience with his young teenagers, and he just enjoys that relationship of coach. So he wants God to be his coach. What relationship do you yearn to have at the soul level? Not just in your head, not just in your heart, but in the marrow of your bones, as a relationship with the universe, in a relationship with energy, in a relationship with spirit, in a relationship with higher power. God as we don't understand it. What do you yearn for? When we sincerely took this position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new relationship. I'm going to substitute some of the words here. Page 63, first paragraph. Being all powerful, God provides what I need. Notice, it doesn't say what I want. It says what I need. And there's 2 conditions here. If I keep close to God and perform God's work well. I'm a big book fundamentalist and literalist. What does that mean? If I keep close to God, oh, maybe step 11. Perform God's work well, maybe step 12. I don't think that's a stretch. I think that's a legitimate interpretation. Let me read it in that context. God will provide what I need if I do step 11 and step 12. Not what I want, but what I need. Protects us in nothing, supports us in everything. There's a correlation. I believe there's some wonderful truth to be mined out of these kinds of words and concepts. Established on such a footing, this relationship, we became less and less interested in ourselves. Here's the dimmer switch, less and less. Interested in ourselves, that self-centeredness I talked about on page 62. More and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. There's the turning. More and more, the dimmer switch, going up a notch at a time, the light's getting brighter. What can we contribute to life? As we felt new power flow in, here the process, came to believe, awaken. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, hear the process, hear the promise, hear the progress. As we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of God's presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. The fear of death itself. We are reborn. A pretty charismatic religious term. We are reborn. We're given a new life. That's why he says down below, this is only a beginning. We are reborn. Then we have to grow up. through the program of recovery, the process. So this is the third step prayer, but I want to pray it antiphonally. That's the word I'll use from the monastery, where we had a bank of monks on the left side of the chapel and a bank of monks on the right side of the chapel. On the left side, the monks would begin a prayer and pause, and the monks on the other side would pray the same prayer out loud. And that's what I'm going to invite you to do. You're all on mute. You're welcome to not participate, and you're welcome to participate. If you participate, you're welcome to say it out loud. I really recommend that you pray out loud, and you're welcome to pray it to yourself. Yeah, I have no rules. None. I follow the tradition and culture of the 12-step spirit. No rules. As Bill said, there's only two disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. One is God and the other is alcohol. You're either going for one or you're going for the other. I mean, I love that kind of duality. The difference which is either going down toward the darkness or it's going up toward the light. There's no resting space. Daily reprieve. I wonder what Bill meant by that. Maybe he meant daily. No weekends off. So think about the concept that you chose in step 2, the God of your understanding. What word or phrase do you use? Think of the relationship today, maybe that you even either reconfirmed or you might have adopted a new one, a new relationship. I currently am using the word for the last year or two, flow. Somebody used that word earlier in her description. I use the term flow. I'm in the flow, capital F. Reality manifesting around me is God's manifestation of God. I am not God, but I am not God. I unpacked that in my discussion on step 2. Somebody mentioned that one of her goals in this process is unity. That's it. Unity, a oneness with reality. Communion with the community. Step 3 is not surrender. Step 3 is not passive. In fact, listen to the step itself. Made a decision to turn. It's a ferocious act of my free will. It's a ferocious act of my free will. I am going to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. That's my will. That's my decision. That's my decision to have a relationship. And it's my commitment to do steps 4 through 9 so that I will have the obstacles in me, the clouds in me removed so that the sunlight can shine brightly in me, through me, to others. The clouds will dissipate. The darkness will diminish, the light will improve, and the light will shine through me as a lantern, a channel of the light to the environment and the people around me. I'm inviting you to pray antiphonally. I'll pray a word and then you pray it. I'll pray a phrase and then you pray it. And we will continue until we finish the prayer. And so place yourself in the presence, the awesome presence of this reality that you have chosen and you hope It's real. You have no knowledge that it is. You have no necessary feeling that it is, but you have made a decision that it is. And step 3 is a commitment to do the work, to find the light, to dispel the darkness, to awaken. Please join me antiphonally, one word, one phrase at a time. God, I offer myself to you to build with me and to do with me as you wish. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always. And now in unison, as you would with a sponsor and or a step guide. And figuratively, we'll be holding hands in a common room, praying this prayer in unison. Join me all together. God, I offer myself to you to build with me and to do with me as you wish. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always. We came to this process in the bondage of addiction and in the bondage of self. And Bill says we're building an arch through which we're going to walk to a new freedom. I think the assumption is that step 1 is the foundation of this arch that I talked about, the big book talks about. As I said, step 1 is a surrender in complete defeat. Step 2 is that willingness, just a plain willingness. There's no even certitude, there's no decision, there's no feeling about step 2. There's just this willingness to choose that God is. Page 53, that's your choice. It's a faith decision. But then we're led to another decision in step 2. Step 3, Bill calls it the keystone, a decision to turn. The next time he mentions it is step 5. Notice on the chart, I just put up step 5. Page 75. At the end of the 5th step, he makes the next and final reference to this architectural analogy about a spiritual arch through which we walk to freedom. So he's leaving it to our imagination. Well, what are the building blocks? This is what we'll look at next month, is the building block of resentment. And the following months, we'll look at fear and sex and dishonesty and secrets. These are the building blocks of the spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. At least this is the way that I've experienced and now interpreted that journey from bondage to freedom. But look at it this, and when you see it, it's still pathetic Herbie behind prison bars, but there's no wall, there's no ceiling, there's no floor. There's just pathetic Herbie holding the prison bars in front of his face in the delusion that he's in prison. Step 4 through 9 is about identifying those bars as of my own making and dropping the bars. perhaps you'll join me now in this prayer for transformation. This is the prayer that Bill suggests in step 11 in the 12 and 12. I call it the transformation prayer, the channel of grace encompassing the flow of light in me to become a lantern so that I can stand by the path as a lantern, channeling the light on the path so that people can walk that path in the light of my experience to have their own experience. And after we pray this prayer, I'm happy to stay on the line on the Zoom call to answer any questions or to hear your comments and or experiences until, in fact, we're done, and then we'll close it when we're done. Very practical that way. Please join me again, though, in unison in praying this prayer for transformation, the St. Francis prayer. Hear the turning in it. Hear the process in it. Hear the promises of it. The turning, a process. The turning, a promise. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love. That where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness. That where there is discord, I may bring harmony. That where there is error, I may bring truth. That where there is doubt, I may bring faith. That where there is despair, I may bring hope. That where there are shadows, I may bring light. That where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now suggests that the secret to life, wow, that's an ominous beginning, isn't it? What a sentence. Get a fresh highlighter. The secret to life is to die before you die and realize there is no death. Steps 4 through 9 is the death of the false self so that the authentic true self can emerge and live a life of freedom.